Let's continue with the second half of our day. It's my great pleasure to welcome Elizabeth Webb, who's part of our Radical Naturalism series that you can see with the title wall there, for her exhibition, A Bearing Tree is a Witness, an Oak is an Echo, which is part of our ongoing series inviting contemporary artists to respond to the work in our collection by John James Audubon. Elizabeth and I were talking earlier, as you might discover in the exhibition, and Elizabeth will talk about, I assume, in a minute. The work in the exhibition revolves around a plot of land, her family's ancestral land, very close to here, very close to where the museum is. And it's, I think, special for all of us that your first museum exhibition is here at the closest art museum to that spot. Elizabeth will be in conversation today with the poet Joy Harjo, the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States and a renowned performer and writer of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Joy was also with us for the Witness Prize earlier this year, and it's been a wonderful couple engagements just getting to know both of you, and I'm so grateful, Joy, that you're back here in conversation with Elizabeth. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Are you ready?
Yeah, ready. Always ready. Yeah, well, thank you again, Chris, and thanks to everyone here. It is really an honor to be here and to have my first solo exhibition, museum exhibition, I should say, first solo museum exhibition here at an institution that is so close to the land that is really at the root of so much of my practice. And I also really want to thank the folks at the museum. There's a lot of unseen labor that goes into these exhibitions, and so I really want to name Brian, Deli, Chris, Jessica, Christy, Isaac, Julie, Aaron, Annie Campbell from Ceramics, the wonderful folks at the library, the many students who actually spent hours babysitting a laser cutter for me, Mike, Ian, and James as well. So yeah, thank you all. The other reason, or one of the other reasons that it's so special to be here sitting on the stage right now is the wonderful human that is sitting next to me, which is Joy Harjo. And, you know, in Poet Warrior, you talked about how each poem has artistic ancestors, and there's sort of a lineage of other works that make each poem possible. And actually, when I first met you, it was I was sort of assigned to be Joy's handler for this event at the Kennedy Center. So I was tasked with taking her to her COVID tests, et cetera, going to Nordstrom, et cetera. Now we're here in this very different context, but you gave us a CD, I Pray for My Enemies, as a thank you for that work. And as I drove around, this was right around the time that I was building this exhibition. I was really first starting to conceive of it and thinking through it. And I drove around this land listening to that CD sort of on repeat. And so I think of your voice and your words kind of as an artistic ancestor of this body of work. So it's really an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. Well, every song has ancestors, every poem, just like every person. And this land here is my family's ancestral lands. So it's interesting. There's a connection too with her exhibit. You know what you're concerned with in your art, trying to express. Always, I think, even with artists, I know with poetry, you're trying to express what you can't. You can't find words for, and I think it's very much the same for artists. And we were going to go to the Battle Horseshoe Bend grounds, where my grandfather, I'm 6 generations from Manahui, that's what we call him, or you guys call him Minowa. And it's hard to go there. The first time I went there, I got bronchitis. I never had it before or since, and that's grief. And so I have a connection here. I'm also a member of Ogiabova Hickory Grounds Ceremonial Grounds. So on the premises of the university here, the bones of our ancestors, literal familial ancestors, were dug up, and they're in I can feel them. They're in in a building, and they want to go home. So there's a lot of reasons, coming back, as you talk about land. So I'm very interested in what you and what everyone else here has been doing in their discussions. What's been coming up for me a lot is contradictions. Human beings are contradictory beings. We all embody contradictions, and I won't tell you all of mine. But, and the land too. I mean, the land, I guess in all of this and what I'm hearing in the wonderful discussions that have been going on and in the art is a major contradiction in this country and maybe the whole world is that you have a belief system in which, earth, Igana Jaga, mother, being, life force, being like you and me. And it's a she. And then the winds and the elements and the animals and the rock beings, where they're all have a presence. And the two-legged human beings aren't above everyone else, but we're all in this place, moving together in a way and challenging each other. That's how we grow spiritual muscle. But here we are all together. And what happens when you have a system that said, this is an it? Our God says this land was given to us. Earth is an it. It's resources. I own this. There are boundaries. Our family, this is a land, we were talking earlier about land. What does land grant institution mean? And then we get to your work here, and this is, I think, too, what you're grappling with, too, and your work, we're all grappling with it, whether we know it or not, is, this boundaries, land, ancestors that were given no place, were chattel and other ancestors who owned. And so you want to tell us, a little bit something, about how you're going about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that, relating to what you said, I think about the scholar Mishwana Goman, who's Tonawanda Bend of Seneca, and she talks about that one of the consequences of colonialism is this sort of collapsing of the idea of land into European conceptions of property, bounded property, and that actually part of the work is to sort of unbind these definitions and to reopen the idea of land as a site of sort of storied connection, and that's part of the work. And so I think about that as I grapple with what it means to be in this place, which, as Chris mentioned, is a site that many people in my family call home, or were born there, but it is not ancestral land for my family. The starting point of the exhibit, so part of the Radical Naturalism series is inviting artists to sort of come and engage with the museum's extensive collection of works by John James Audubon. And I had been thinking about, in my sort of long research about my family's relationship to this area, I came across the field notes from the 1834 land surveys of land that was in my family for a long time, land that held a plantation that was fueled by enslaved labor, others of whom, some of those people were my family as well, as were the white settlers. And this moment of 1834 is also one of the heights of Muskogee dispossession and forcible removal. And just after that is when my family sort of comes from Virginia into the area and sets up this plantation. And then that land is sort of passed down to the Black side of my family, and then it is lost in all the ways that Black land is often lost throughout the 20th century. And so there are all these like layers and sites of contradiction and all of that too, right? But these field notes really stuck out to me because, and I didn't really know what field notes were, but basically like pre-GPS, field notes were used in land surveys, in tandem with land surveys, to kind of make tangible the grid, the property grid that was being imposed upon the landscape. So trees actually would be the physical sort of manifestation of property lines. And in land surveying language, official land surveying language, a bearing tree is a witness to a survey corner. And that sort of stuck to me, partly because of the ways that I think about Saidiya Hartman's scholarship and thinking through landscape as a witness to histories that might exist outside of the archive, particularly of Black women. And in thinking about that, you know, there's many figures that I feel like guide me through this work in my family and outside. And the story of Paradise was one of those that sort of guides my practice. And she was a Black woman known as being very beautiful, but she never allowed her picture to be taken. And so there are no recorded images of her. And that's my great grandmother. And I think about sort of the lack of image of her, not as sort of a loss in relation to my family history, but more as an act of power on her part to sort of, or refusal to be subsumed into an archive that maybe couldn't hold her in all of her complexity as a Black woman in the rural South at the turn of the century, during this time of ongoing violence. And so really turning to the landscape that witnessed her life as a sort of alternative record of presence, and listening to the stories of the trees, these bearing trees, the stories of the plants, the stories that the soil, you know, holds. So thinking sort of with the land in that way. And also these field notes, to me, it's sort of charming that people chose plants and, you know, natural beings to be the sort of marker of the grid, because that's a totally like ridiculous construct. Like trees don't grow in squares. And like when you would, oftentimes the land would be cleared for farming, and sometimes they would accidentally clear the bearing markers. So there's this process of erasure that happens with the landscape too. And so what happens when a tree of the same species grows like 20 feet from its original location? How is that sort of skewing the grid? The root networks that happen below the soil were never bound to this settler colonial system of order. And so I think about the plants and all of those, the ways that the natural world sort of, was never fully contained by this logic, but also then the ways that extends to our bodies. And then the ways that my family has sort of negotiated the color line. So that's sort of like what the show is about.
Thank you.
In a nutshell.
I know, you know what I wanted, you went right into that, and I was going to open, tell us about Paradise.
Yeah. Sorry.
And you messed up my little question there, that's fine.
I can tell you more about her.
Yeah,
She had 13 children.
13 children. I mean, the story, that's what's amazing. I think it's like poets. I at night, I go digging around, you know. I can go digging around in sounds, I can go digging around in words, but I go digging around in genealogy and history and pulling up stuff, because I think of in our Muskogee Creek, our family, we go digging around. That's how you know history, is through genealogy and the stories. That's what I like. The one thing that Lonnie, you know, and others were saying too about, you know, you learn from talking to people, you know, we all carry history. And what happens when the kids are just, you know, watching these screens and not, you know, learning that they embody history and what they embody. So I was thinking too, as you were talking about how trees are you know, they have code, they're coding too, and they're witness. The trees too are witnesses and have a lot to say about what's going on. But I was wondering too about how it's really intriguing, those porcelain, the porcelain that you're using as, you know, as a kind field notes. I was thinking, it was interesting. I was saying, okay, there's these Audubon prints up here, and you were telling me that it's the plants that you were most interested in because they're part of the field notes. The birds are too. Whether they're there, some of them might even be extinct now. And some of the plants, like when I come here, it's really sad. I see our story roots and the medicine plants. You know, they're here. It's like, whoa, there's a lot of them here. And so I'm thinking about that, how this way, how maybe why you chose to use porcelain, and you've got light coming through, and then these different the words that are, can you tell us a little bit about that and why porcelain, and the kind of, the source for these words that are being broken, are appearing through, and some of them appear to be almost shredded?
Yeah, absolutely. And one quick thing about the Audubons is that the Audubons that I chose, as you said, are ones that depict the plant life that existed in those 1834 field notes. But then also, of those, I only selected the ones that were printed right around that same time. So Audubon is sort of participating in this westward expansion and this desire to sort of order and claim and know and name, right, the different species that exist in the world. And so he's sort of part of this gridding too. So I wanted to sort of choose the pieces that were actually physically printed during that time as well. But the porcelain pieces, I've worked with porcelain in a number of different ways over the years, but sort of, one day I decided I was gonna make a porcelain document. And then I spent years making a porcelain document. Now here I am making more porcelain documents, but and my interest in that material is, multifaceted. I'm interested in it. It is a material of the earth. And so that is something that is important to me. It's also a material that is known for its sort of preciousness. It is passed down often among generations. It is something that is quite fragile, and it's in the state that it is in the show, right? Because it's so thin, but molecularly it's actually very strong. And it's also known for its proximity to whiteness. And all of those things were sort of at play and important to me as I thought about what it could do in my work. And also the other fun fact about porcelain is that it's sort of inherently not what it is. Like for years, Europeans tried to replicate authentic porcelain. And so what we see as porcelain isn't really authentic porcelain. And so that was sort of another layer that was important to me. But
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
What's the difference with real porcelain and
it has to do with the clay. We have a ceramicist. Bethany's.
Sorry. I don't want to get off. I'm just curious.
No. Yeah. I think it has to do with the clay body and the minerals.
Okay.
That were sort of present in a particular geography. And
sort of like champagne and sparkling wine.
Probably so. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Tastes the same, but
okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But so I for these pieces, I laser cut text into watercolor paper that's actually 100% cotton, which is also important to me. And so the text that is there always begins as an absence, which is also important to me. And then I cover it in liquid porcelain that is actually contains also paper in it, because paper helps bind things, thinking about Bethany's work in that regard as well. And in the firing process, the paper burns away. So you're left with this incredibly fragile shell. And the kiln creates these breakages. And I was interested in how that process actually, the work is creating this other map. They become these sort of topographies that are completely outside of my control as a creator. Truly, I'll open the kiln and it will be a surprise every time. True surprise. And so thinking about how even if I create some sort of grid or structure, that it's always altered by the process itself and always outside of my control as a human. The text on those pieces is, there are several different things happening on the text. They're outlined in a grid pattern, superimposed onto a plat map from the land that is just about 15 miles from here, near Lochapoka. that held a plantation for a long time that was in my family. And so some of the field notes are listed in the grid. But then also in other parts of the grid, there are interviews with family members that I did about their sort of interactions with the color line. A number of my family members moved north during different parts of the Great Migration and had different experiences navigating the color line. Some of them were light enough to pass as white and did so. Others of them were light enough to pass as white and did not do so. And still others found other ways to, make a way for themselves through, beside, underneath these systems of power and control, right? So there are anecdotes in there where, like my great aunt Jane, who's the youngest child of Paradise, and who actually, she was the impetus for why I first searched for an image for Paradise, because she always wanted to see her mother. Her mother died when she was very young. And so she's the one that told me the story about her mother and having no images of her. But Jane talked to me about how in DC, in segregated DC in the 1940s, your complexion could be sort of a range. You could be quite dark or visibly black, but if you could speak a foreign language, then you were able to access whites-only spaces. So she had friends who would learn like a couple words of French and go see a movie in the white theater. And so that they were able to sort of pass as not American. My great aunt Irene, Jane's sister, talks about purchasing a house in an all-white neighborhood outside of Detroit in the 60s. And they were denied because there were covenants against that. So they had a friend purchase the house on their behalf, and then they moved in. And they became the first Black family in that area. So all of these sort of negotiations of structures that are so related and intertwined with these colonial systems of order, but the ways, again, that centering sort of the ways that our bodies and the plant life and the natural world were never fully contained by them.
So thank you for that. Once when I went into this one recording studio working with an engineer, and they said to me, what is it, they asked me, what is it you want to learn while making this record? I thought, that's really good. And one of them I learned to play, my first one, I was learning to play sax. I learned to play flute. One, I learned to sing. And so I was thinking, so in this exhibit, and you've got different pieces, thematically kind of different pieces that you were working on. And is what have you learned since you began this process of any of these different projects that you have, illustrated here or present here? Is the better word. What is it you learn? What is it I don't know that you can say you think you want to learn, but I guess maybe I don't want to ask what is your obsession. I don't want to give that away, but yeah, what is it you think you've learned, and maybe what is it you still don't know enough? What is it that sits there yet to be explored?
Yeah, I mean, it all sits there still. Yeah. I think in my work, I never seek answers. It's always more questions. I go through these periods of deep research. I'll fall into a hole learning about the technologies of land surveying, for instance, for months. And so I've learned a lot about that. Mm-hmm. But I've learned that the first paintball gun was developed in order to mark trees. And so the violences of the scope of a gun are related to the violences of the scope of the surveying instrument, and the sort of systems of visuality that are imposed upon the landscape are inherently violent. Anyway, there's all sorts of little things that I've learned like that, right? And of course, I've learned about my family and learned about myself and learned about the land and the ways that people exist in this world. But ultimately, it's always questions. the process, like I never start out like knowing exactly what I'm going to make at the end, because to me, the process of making is so much about, figuring it out. If I knew what it would be at the end, then I wouldn't make it, because it would feel already resolved, or like there would be no purpose.
No, I understand. That's being an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think there's still questions. I think ultimately it's questions about what it means to be here in this place right now, and how that relates to what it meant to be here in this place before, and what it means, what it will mean to be here in the future or not here. Yeah.
I just keep thinking, and I don't know if this is going to be a question, it's a question for everybody, or a question is, I keep thinking of this land and the way that everyone keeps addressing it in some way. And I think about, there's a point where you can stand and look at Earth, and Earth is a whole being, and we're all in here together. But then what do you do? I mean, we're all working on it with this division, and how. And I keep thinking, well, the Earth herself asserts herself. Last night at home in the Tulsa area, it was outside, the epicenter was outside of Oklahoma City. We had a 5.1 earthquake, fracking. So the Earth has their own voice, and what happens, I guess, to a people too. That's what we're all, everyone is exploring, is how the impact of our thinking. I mean, thinking is a living thing. That's how we wind up where we are. And what happens with collective thinking and the power of art to, that's what artists do. We're kind of running a little ahead. We're kind of the messengers, and maybe even the visionaries, listening to our ancestor, the ancestral lines that move through, and the ancestral earth that moves through us, because Earth is part of our ancestral self. And I keep thinking of that video. I guess it's video or film. Film.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, there's a difference. That film. that is it. 7 minutes. You have it a certain 7 minutes for a certain reason, and and it's directly tied to the presence and the experience of Earth. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's 7 minutes and 20 seconds, which corresponds, so it's physical film that corresponds to 264 feet, I believe, of physical film running through the projector at 24 frames per second. And that distance is equivalent to the perimeter of a square chain. And a chain is the baseline measurement in land surveying. So people would take physical chains and sort of plot out the land, measure out the land. And so I wanted the film to refer to that, and because there is a way that in all of the little square frames that make up this film, there is another kind of mapping that's going on. But I wanted to also sort of collaborate with the land in a certain way, and allow for agency, allow for the earth speaks, as you said, and allow for the earth to speak in the film. And so I actually, part of the film you kind of see is the burial of the film along the boundary line, along the property boundary line. And what happens when you do that is that the microbes in the soil actually eat away at the emulsion of the film, because it's gelatin based, so it's like Jell-O, it's food.
Dessert,
right?
Or in the South, it's salad, right?
Yeah. Also in Iowa, my mom's from Iowa, and there's plenty of Jell-O salads. Yes, but so the microbes eat away at the emulsion, and they actually erase parts of the image. And that's another sort of process that I can't control, or I can in a very limited way in terms of the amount of time that it's buried, for instance. But which parts of the image are destroyed or remade or altered or sort of layered becomes something that the land decides. And the land sort of is contesting the visualization of the boundary, in the same way. Yeah.
So where do you go from here in this exploration, or do you know? I mean, I understand.
Yeah.
I often don't know what I'm doing, and I find it as I go.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. In terms of what's next, I mean, I always, it's like I work so cyclically, but like somehow kind of always moving forward, but also always moving backwards, and sort of mining my own archive as I do new things. And a lot of times I'll be like, oh, I'm doing something totally new. And then I'll look back from it a couple years down the line and be like, oh, that was totally related to this other thing that I did. But I'm actually working on my first feature-length film, which takes up a lot of these ideas that are present in the exhibit, but will be in film form.
In film form. So what?
Yeah, well, so it will include the voices of many of my family members talking about their negotiations with the color line. It will delve more into the history of land surveying and its connection with the color line and other sort of systems of power and control, the connections to the myth of white supremacy as well, but also always recentering the landscape. So that film, actually, the duration of that one will be 1 hour and 13 minutes and 20 seconds, I believe, which is the distance, the physical distance around, half the distance of the perimeter of 40 acres. So sort of alluding to this failed promise by the US government to Black people, 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
So this sort of incomplete. It's always slightly incomplete. Yeah. But there are many plants in the show too. I mean, oaks are central in the work, and an oak is an echo is referencing the oaks because oaks also defy human categorization. There's so much hybridity in oaks that actually things like cryptic species emerge. Where two species might look phenotypically the exact same, but be entirely different species. And the reverse is true as well, where two plants might look phenotypically totally different, but actually be, the entirely the same species. Yeah, and so there are many layers in all of the work, and we're only sort of just touching the tip of the iceberg. But I actually had a question for you too. I have a lot of questions for you actually,
Okay,
which we
good,
don't have
'cause
time for. But one question I do, it does feel like you sort of write with the land too. You don't necessarily write about the land in a certain way. Do you feel like that is true, or how do you view your sort of work with land when you invoke it in your poems?
Well, I started writing partly because of the land. I was working on my BFA in studio art, particularly painting and drawing. And my grandmother, Naomi Harjo, was a painter and a saxophone player. She played saxophone in Indian Territory, Muskogee woman. And I always say, put that in your bag of images of natives, And, but I wound up, I was part of Native rights movements, and there were a lot of poets. First time I heard Native poets. And I went to, what saved my life is I kind of fled from Oklahoma. I think it's part of this whole thing of the removal, being removed and never quite feeling grounded there, and dealing constantly with the history, with, the history, the racial history, and the, political history that's in Oklahoma and through a lot of the South too. And I went to Indian boarding school in New Mexico. It wasn't the kind where, they come and pull the kids out of your arms, although that has happened to friends of mine. It was an Indian art school. Now it's a full-blown arts college, the Institute of American Indian Arts. And it was, New Mexico. It was the late 60s. We had it was the first time we had natives teaching us, and we had the best arts teachers. I didn't write then. I wrote some really poor songs for the all-native acid rock band. But then I was a teenage mother for a while. I shouldn't I'm taking the long way around. But at my age, I'm allowed to do that. And then wound up as a teenage mother living with nothing on the streets of Tahlequah, the Cherokee capital. My husband was Cherokee, the Cherokee capital, and with nothing. We were eating squirrels sometimes and commodity cheese, And then I found my way and got into the University of New Mexico with some help because I didn't know where the front door was. I had no idea how you were going to get in there. And it was there in that fermentation of, human rights and helping communities, going out into Native communities, because we were Native students at school. They thought we knew something because we were in the university and we were studying. Most people weren't studying art, education, law, all of that, and they would have us come out and witness for them when they talked to oil companies and uranium companies and so on. And I heard the language, the poetry of those people who were defending their land, their place, because they had the history. We have it in our bodies, in our DNA, but they had it in their literature and in their songs and all. But you can imagine how that goes over with people who only believe in papers again. But that's got me interested in poetry. Then I heard Native poets, and it just started happening. I didn't expect it at all. In fact, that was not my plan. But when your spirit tells you something, if you go against it, you pay for it. It was like, this was okay. I'm going to get back to painting. I've got my setup right now. But it was the land. And my poetry came out of, I started learning Navajo because I was able to do that instead of French. And the poetry started there, out of the land. But then it has taken me back. So I knew I would go home eventually. We all do, in one way or the other. And I went back to Oklahoma. I'm living back in the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation, and I have been now for some time. And then I've been back this way a lot. And that's been the hardest thing to reconcile, and that's what everyone in here is trying to reconcile that in some way. Is what is our relationship here? How do we continue? How do we find a way to communicate with each other and to, like taking the atrocity of these heroes made of evil people and then turning it into art? Isn't that the best thing? Turning it in, taking what was meant to destroy us and turning it in. That's what art is, in a way, and turning it into something tangible and beautiful for the children. They're all our children and the grandchildren to thrive and to grow. So that's the long answer. Sorry about that.
No, it's beautiful. Never apologize. I do have one more question before we open it up. Sorry, Chris. But yeah, I mean, to that end, thinking about Auburn as a land-grant institution, which for those who don't know, that means that Auburn, like so many universities in the United States, was formed after the sale of land that the United States, seized illegally,
right,
from indigenous peoples. And so Auburn really, as other institutions do, has that in its DNA. And what are the things that on an institutional level, this university and others like it could do to move towards right relation or equity?
One tangible thing is there's an appeal going on, is to make sure that the Hickory Ground people and the Muskogee Creek Nation are able to take our relatives and rebury them. That would be one tangible thing. Another thing is to, have a percentage or do something that would actually give back in some way directly to the Muskogee people. I know Esperanza Spalding was at Harvard and teaching there, And she tried to get something, she sent me this long paper. She was trying to get the Harvard to do something like that, but that didn't go over very well. But it's an acknowledgement that, okay, I mean, really, we just need all of us need acknowledgement. We're a human being. This is our story. This is real. This really happened. You know, what would happen if we all, you know, in this, you know, even in our families, you know, if we all just said, okay, and cried together and said, I'm sorry, and I love you, and let's try to understand each other. And no, I think of it as resonance. Some people I call it resonance, and some people it's not so, but we're all like that. And plants are like that. People who know that some plants, you know, don't like each other. They, you know, so they have natural, you know, but we're all in here together. I mean, this system, this biosystem thrives on diversity. It's also a thought system, thrives on diversity. The spiritual system, you know, thrives on diversity. That's what we're doing here. But if we look at that, so if the university as a participant in what might say, okay, you know, this is one way to heal. I mean, it's about healing. Ultimately, all of this maybe is about healing. Is okay. Well, this is the Muskogee people are the original caretakers. So how do we engage? You know, and how do we acknowledge? The land acknowledgements only go, I mean, it's a tiny little start, but still there's, okay, then what are you going to do about it? You see. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so
All right, I have the microphone again, so we have time for a couple questions.
I had a question about your work in a lot of the series. You work with like primary documents that deal with how the government and systems of power try to categorize individuals and bodies, and then in other works like the one up on your screen, and in the video, sorry, the hand pointing, and in the video, and even in the stereoscopic viewfinder, there's this implication of the body or even the use of your own body. And so I'm wondering how you think about those two things, the use of your body,
That's a good one.
like in tandem or separately from kind of this research-based practice or series in which the body is visibly absent.
yeah, wow. I mean, I started out actually, the first sort of artwork that I made was performance-based video. So it kind of actually started with my body and thinking about what my body meant in the land. I think that, you know, though I'm not, well, I am, I guess, physically present in this exhibit in a number of different ways. I think that it, you know, there's always this grappling with myself and identity and things like that. Also because of my own experiences growing up in a very white context in Charlottesville, Virginia, constantly being asked what I was and not knowing the answer to that question until I was 18. Right? Not knowing that I had Black members of my family until I was 18. And there is this way that, you know, as a Black woman who has white presenting privilege, my body moves through the world in a very specific way. And I'm very aware of that. And I think that in that way, my body moves with the land in a very specific way too. And so I think that there's a level of like wanting to implicate myself in these systems too, right? I'm not I don't exist outside of a settler colonial context. I'm in it, I'm implicit, I'm complicit in it in a number of different ways, right? And so there is sort of a nodding to that. But then in the hands, so those are actually platinum plated bronze. And I wanted to use platinum to nod to the original meter standard. So in the sort of vaults of Paris, there are these meter standard bars, which actually emerged at the end of the 19th century. And there were these physical platinum bars upon which, that were exactly 1 meter, what was decided upon as 1 meter. And many Western measurements are based off of those. So I wanted to take this material that is the sort of standard, and then put it onto hands, which we know are like totally like non-objective, and sort of question the idea of what is standard. And so that's where sort of my hand gesture frames there.
All right, I have a question back here.
I have a question that deals with the land notes. And I think you mentioned that with the land notes, that included using trees and shrubbery to kind of guide the people who were trying to map out this way. But I wanted to know if you've ever, either one of you have ever come across Native American or Indian marker trees. Are you familiar with those? Could you talk a little bit about it if you can?
I didn't get the last part. Has you asked, has any of us come across any Native
Native American marker trees or Indian marker trees?
marker
Trees, T-R-E, yes, I'm sorry, it's not coming across very clearly. Indian marker trees. They are trees that have been shaped in a way to show what direction you should go by Native Americans. Here in Auburn, the Auburn Cemetery, there are about 4 of them there.
Oh, interesting.
And some of them they're used by Native Americans would take other strong trees or straps and pull the tree in a certain direction.
Right.
And I've been very fascinated about it. I've taken pictures in Florida, all over Alabama. And what I've noticed is that the major highways like 459, there are some huge oak marker trees that are going straight, then they have a bow and they come back. So those are not, they don't grow like that. And I just wondered if you've ever had that experience of seeing those before.
I know of them, and what's interesting too is a lot of the highways are based on old native trails.
Yes, they are. And those trees are usually in the shadows, and you really can't see them until the leaves fall. And when the leaves fall, then you can see them on Highway 280, leaving Auburn, going to Birmingham. You'll see about 4 of them, but you have to really, this is the time of the year to look. Once the trees have leaves, you will not see them. And I even found one pine tree in Hoover, Alabama, by a shallow creek, which I've taken a picture of. That was the only one I've ever seen that was a pine tree, but most of them are oak. And if you look for them, you'll see them. They're fascinating.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, I want to stick around. I'd like to chat with you.
I hear your next project happening.
I think we have time for one last question.
And if there's not one, oh wait, there are some.
Okay.
But also Joy has agreed to read a poem. So maybe we can probably do both though. I think there's time for both. It's a short one.
Is there a question?
I think the hands went down when we heard that there was a
Oh,
poem.
okay.
But maybe there's
I just wanted to ask about text being partially illegible, and also when we came into the auditorium, we heard Joy Harjo's beautiful voice reading that cedar tree. I don't know if that's the title, but that was the central image. But it was so soft that a lot of people probably didn't even know. So I wonder about this theme of unintelligibility. Is that on purpose, or because it requires a lot of effort to try to understand? And I just wondered about that.
Yeah, it's absolutely on purpose. And certainly, I mean, with the porcelains, I'm very interested in this move in and out of legibility. And that's a result that also happens from the process itself. That's something that I don't really control. But I'm interested in that move in and out of legibility as it relates to the way that the passing subject moves in and out of social legibility. So the ways that a body my body, your body, someone's body might be read as one thing in one situation and something entirely differently in another situation. And so I always sort of seek to enact the meaning of the work in the viewer's process of engaging with it.
Wonderful. Joy, would you like to read something?
I'm going to, we need to probably get to the next person, but I'm going to sit in with him. I'll do one of my poems then.
Afterwards with the performance.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you both so much.
Program in the gallery with Lonnie Holly, and Joy will also read some poetry. We're ready for our last conversation of the day. Where'd Walter go? Did he run away? Bad timing, Walter. I'm introducing you currently. Well, Taniesha can come up on the stage. Did Walter know he was next up? Well, I hope that you've all seen the exhibition Arc of Life, Arc of Bones in the Grand Gallery, and if you haven't, you can see it shortly. I'm so glad that Walter Hood will be with us in a second, and this is this is slightly poetic because Walter flew here as we were all talking, so we were just waiting for him to get from Atlanta to the airport, and I was so relieved that he was actually here, and now it's time to speak, and he's disappeared, so. Okay, great. It's my pleasure to introduce Taniesha West Albert, who's an assistant professor of interior design in the College of Human Sciences at Auburn University. She's been celebrated with awards from the American Society of Interior Design and the Interior Design Educator Council, where she received the Presidential Award in 2021. Walter Hood is the creative. Right on time. It was perfect. Is the creative director and founder of Hood Design Studio in Oakland, California, where he's also a chair and professor of landscape architecture, environmental planning, and urban design. He's a MacArthur Fellow, a member of the Academy of Arts and Letters, and received the Architectural League's President's Medal Award in 2021. And it's a great pleasure to have you both with us today to talk about Walter's amazing work here in Auburn. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to start off by telling all of you guys that I am a huge fangirl of Walter. I am a native Sacramentan, and as a Black Sacramentan, first-generation Californian, we would go to Oakland to get the culture, you know?
Yeah.
So you have been a part of my, existence, I feel, since I was a young girl. And not thinking about interior design or architecture or building communities, but still trying to find a way to support and build our community.
Yeah.
So it's ironic that I'm sitting here with you. It's like a child's dream come true.
It was meant to happen.
It was
Right,
meant
yeah,
to happen. So I'm just gonna act like I'm talking to you and these people are not here.
It's fine.
And Chris is gonna have to wrap me up because I'm gonna go over. And I promise I will get to the exhibit here.
Don't worry
but
about
this is like,
No, don't worry about it.
this is like a lifetime
Yeah.
opportunity. Okay. All right. So I have 8 questions and a couple from the exhibit, but I'm gonna narrow it down. So Walter, and your approach to blending architecture and urbanism and landscape, you place a strong emphasis on cultural practice. As a fellow academic and designer, who navigates multiple creative spheres, trying to put my culture in it, trying to be true, like what we've learned from a lot of these amazing artists, trying to be true to that path that we're called on. I'm curious about how you integrate and represent the complexities of cultural identity in your projects. How do you ensure that these spaces that you create, and they are amazing spaces, not only reflect the community's history, but also resonate with their current and evolving cultural narratives?
Wow. I don't think there's a single answer for that. I mean, studying architecture or studying a profession, they beat you out of you, right, to become that. And so probably for the first decade of wanting to be an architect or a landscape architect, I wasn't present, right? I was literally taught to be this other thing. I wouldn't even call it a person per se, because you're just basically manufacturing things, right? And it got to a point where I said, there's something wrong. And I had gone from North Carolina all the way to New York, and I ended back at Philadelphia. And I just found there was just something wrong. And so I met a guy who had just come from California, brother, black guy, played football at Penn State, 6'2", studied architecture, and he was like the blackest guy I'd ever met, right? I mean, he just embodied, he just didn't give up his athleticism, none of that. And he was just so original. And I was like, wow. And he just told me all about California. And I got in my car, literally, and drove across the country. And it changed my life, because all the things that I had been told on the East Coast, on the West Coast, no one gave a shit about. It was like literally no one questioned things that I started doing. And the first time I started disobeying my instructors in school, I found that I got a high out of that, right? Like, like I remember there was a project in graduate school. It was like, we're going to redesign the grounds of the Presidio. And, coming from a military family, I'm like, I didn't come to fucking school to design military landscapes. And I decided to do something else. And I decided to do these gardens out of the batteries that were along the West Coast where the big guns were, protecting the West Coast. And I had a whole wall of work in this school. And when they got to my work, this very important artist, landscape architect looked at it, was like, what is this project? And then my instructor said, well, Walter didn't want to do the project. He wanted to do this. All the chairs got up and they moved to the next work. And I clapped. I left because there was two of us in the college, two of us black students, and my friend was there with us, and we went out and got some drinks or whatever. And what was so empowering about that was I made a decision, and I made beautiful work, and I trusted myself. And from that point on, there was a kind of a search then for that, like, well, why was I so emboldened? And then we were talking earlier, I started finding people like Leon, improvisation and quilts. I just started like finding these parallels that were happening in the vernacular, but also in the kind of cultural arts, reading Bloch and others, which were talking about, our people and this kind of spirit. And then I just, kind of started forging a path along that way, and not knowing where I would end up. And I ended up here in Alabama. Right, but it's this interesting thing of like not trying to chart, but really trusting your instincts and challenging those things. And that's one reason why I kind of left architecture and landscape and then went into art, because I wanted to actually define myself through the work. And so when someone have to then find ways to get people to understand that it is. And this is really tough. Like one of our first spaces we did in downtown Oakland, Lafayette Square, where there was transients. It had always been a space for men to come because they were out of work since the Depression. So in 1990, 2000, it's no different, but people started calling them homeless, right? And so there was no development given to them. And so what we decided to do was, as we redesigned the space, we left half of it open. So they were there the whole time we were building it, right? And so they saw what went into improving. Then the nonprofit we work with, they became stewards. They basically, then became stewards, and they were paid. And it became a kind of a way of getting people to understand that these gifts are for you, and you can take care of them. And on a couple of occasions, I would go there, and if someone sat on the picnic table, put their ass on the top of the table, someone would come up and go, man, we eat off that, right? And it was those kinds of things. And then slowly you can kind of see the infrastructure of the city literally just destroy that, right? Because again, not listening and not wanting to give this group of people this beauty. And it's not just an aesthetic beauty, but it's a beauty to be in a space, right? And so that's how we educated. We just finished a project in outside of Washington, D.C., which is one of the last spaces of the diaspora of the Freedmen's Village from Arlington Cemetery. And again, Black guys hanging out, nothing to do. We make a space and they're like, what is this for us? And of course, now we have to program it, and tell them it's for them. So it's the same process over and over and over again, but it gets at how broken, right, our system is and how certain people stay undeveloped, or their landscapes stay undeveloped. And I don't mean by building buildings, but it's like you put a house there and then you just walk away from it, right? You build a community and you just walk away. You build the same community side by side. You develop one, you keep giving them resources, and you give these nothing. And then you look at them and go, see, you guys don't know how to take care of anything, right? And so that psychosis actually ends up in the politic, in the infrastructure. And then we start actually thinking, well, maybe we do tear shit up. You know what I mean? And it's this kind of, again, double consciousness that begins to kind of force us to even question. Right. And that's a hard thing to overcome. And that's why we like doing the kind of work, because it is this conversation. And I know we can't solve the problem, but we can be part of sort of alluding to people what these issues are.
I have to say, I'm sure you're the only one in the room that looks like you a lot of times, especially coming up and the beginnings of your design career. I've been there many times, even in spaces that we frequent, and hearing people who own these spaces, and I'm in the room helping to build these spaces, say, well, they're not going to appreciate that. Oh, they're going to steal that, or they're going to tear it up. And, I wonder if it's this, the continual narrative that we are seeing in spaces, structures that continue to harken back to us as chattel, us as slaves, not us in these beautiful, magnificent spaces like some that you paint and in this exhibit right here. And so it's this idea that we haven't built anything nice. We've never existed in anything nice. We've never had nice things. And I continue to grapple with this idea now as a professor of design and seeing who I'm training to build spaces over and over. And again, being the only one in this position now, saying to other people, no, we did have nice things. We did build this country. We used to do this. It's this systematic narrative that took away, architecture programs out of HBCUs and moved them away from so that now, less than 1%
Yeah.
of architects are Black?
Yeah.
We don't even have a number for interior
You don't even
design.
have anything for
We don't
landscape
even,
architects.
no,
Yeah,
you don't
can't
have
even go
anything
there.
for
Yeah,
landscape
yeah.
architecture. So I wonder if now we are even displacing ourselves from things that we used to build.
Yeah.
So that narrative
Yeah.
continues,
Yeah.
Just thinking about that. And that made me think of your work made me think about that. I was lucky enough to sneak in on Monday when things are being built, and I just continued to see the beautiful structures and spaces that we inhabit as Black people,
Yeah.
like the basketball court. I was
Yeah.
like, we would take care of those things.
Yeah.
We would keep them nice. They were built for us, by us,
Yeah.
but we're not building our own communities anymore.
No more swimming pools,
No
no
more
more.
swimming.
Well, it's this weird thing. It's the best way to say it. We spent most of the 20th century creating two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And the two worlds were very clear. I mean, Plessy Ferguson, there was two worlds. And it was just very clear. There were more swimming pools, there was more parks, there was all that, but they were two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Once we were legislated to have one world, that second world, we just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then once we let it go to we left it undeveloped, and then now it's being reclaimed.
Yes.
Right? As if it was vacant and fallow always.
Mm-hmm.
It's like our presence just is not there. And just thinking about the last group talking, it was the group before us.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same erasure that happens
Yeah.
over and over. And, I'm working in my hometown now, and a lot of these images come out of, I had forgotten that I grew up in a segregated landscape because it never felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
It was just Black folk, right? If someone, later someone told me once we were then bused, it's like, no, you got to go here. And I was like, well, what's going on? And then, learning about it later, it was kind of, I don't know, cathartic to a certain degree because the biomass, we had trees, right? We could walk anywhere. My teacher lived across the street. The preacher lived next door.
Hairdresser down the road.
Went to church, with the preacher's son, all of these things. And then my family, like most, when we were legislated to be together, we thought that, this is how we be together. We're going to come out there and we're going to live next to the whites.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we moved there, they left.
Mm-hmm.
Within 2 years, they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like how could a whole community leave in 2 years?
Yeah.
You'd wake up every day, there'd be a vacant house. And these are suburban homes.
Mm-hmm.
And then 20 years later, I return and I'm giving a lecture at UNC Charlotte. And I cut on the TV and there's people walking down the street with candles. I was like, what's going on in Charlotte? And it's that same neighborhood, that suburb. And it's now was crime infested. The drug dealers had taken it over. And they were basically doing a walk to stop the crime. And so it's just seeing that kind of full circle. I'm like, this is mad. This is madness. And just keep moving and moving and moving, right? And now in Charlotte, we don't exist.
It makes me think about Detroit right now.
Yeah.
So much about Detroit. And
Yeah.
I'm a child of family that did the Great Migration thing and got to California because military. And then, of course, for undergrad, I hightailed my butt to the South. They were like, they're going to eat you alive, girl. I survived. I'm still here. But but in the process of that and what you're talking about, it's one of those reasons that kind of helped me switch into design. I didn't even realize I'm a first generation college student. My family are sharecroppers. They were slaves.
Yep.
They did the whole journey navigating the color lines through Missouri and out to California. So context. But I'd never seen a Black architect or designer. You were the first Black architect that I had ever heard of when I was in high school. So that building communities was never anything my family said is a viable opportunity for me to build my people. And I think about Detroit and that right now too, right? Because it's very much the white flight happened and Now, people who are building all of those communities didn't value us because it was segregated.
Yeah.
And now who's going to build those? Because our industry is still segregated. Even our academic industry is segregated. So who's going to build those communities with dignity and respect?
Well, they're not building them for us.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's the thing. They're not building them for us. You go to Detroit, we were working in the Rosa Parks neighborhood, and one neighbor was like, they don't care about us. They're building buildings out of wood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, we don't build buildings out of wood in Detroit. We build buildings out of bricks. But this idea, this kind of disrespect even for the kind of the sustainability and, thinking about winters and all of this and just coming in. And, there was a family that lived like close to 8 Mile, and she wanted to show me that in their backyard at one time was a golf course. And that Black folk made so much good money. That's 8 Mile, where they moved out and they lived in these amazing places with golf courses. And some
things that people don't think Black people do until Tiger Woods came along, right? Like, okay.
But then some guy moves in, young hipster dude, and he starts a community garden in his front yard, talking about food shortages and all this shit. And she was just, how dare you? We've been here for 40 years. We know where our food comes from. We don't need you here, doing this typical
savior.
The savior thing of like, now I'm going to teach you how to eat healthy food. We're going to grow it here. We're going to pick it here.
We've never grown and picked agriculture ever. We don't know about that.
Don't get me going on community gardens. Do not get me going there. It's like, I am not picking anything because, it's like, I did it all when I was a kid. This is hard freaking work.
We're not doing
this is
anymore.
not fun stuff, right? But yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. We just had a moment. We got to bring everybody back with this. Okay. So let's lean more into that since we're making everybody uncomfortable anyway. Let's talk about, so in creating spaces that are inclusive and reflective of diverse communities, how do you address that socioeconomic disparity that often exists between these communities? As an interior designer, I find that aspect central in building communities and building spaces. Really, it's about access of all people, no matter their SES. It was just said earlier, everyone deserves good design, right?
Yes.
So can you share some of your strategies for ensuring that your designs are accessible and beneficial to all segments of the community?
Equity.
Can you say that again?
Equity.
Can you lean into that and say
Equity. Going back to this first project from our studio, Lafayette Square, we came up with this design that was based on, the history of these men and women being in this space, and they were from all different walks of life. I take it to the mayor's office. I'm talking to the mayor. He asked me, how much is that going to cost, Mr. Hood? And I said, $1.5 million, and this is in 1997 or something. And he looked at me and he said, for homeless people, you must be out of your damn mind. He said this. I'm not going to say which mayor it was. And we had this beautiful wood model. And this is the other thing in all of our projects. We don't care who we're working for. You get the same treatment. Right? If I'm making a beautiful model for a museum, if I'm working in a community, you're going to get a beautiful model. Right? And so there's equity in the production for one. And I'll tell you, in some community meetings we go in, people are like going, wow. Again, this is for us. No one's ever done this for us. So there is a kind of a commitment from the beginning to create equity. But then on the backside, it's like, landscapes cost money. And this is what people don't really think about. It's like a building. You can see a building. It's like, okay, I got walls, I got light. But landscapes, you can say $5 a square foot for a landscape might get you some grass. $7 might get you some concrete with some grass. $10 might get you some bushes, some trees and grass, right? And so you can kind of see where I'm going. And so when you go to neighborhoods where people look like me, all you get is concrete and grass and some asphalt. Because that's the amount of investment. Then I go to these other places and they got trees, they got granite, they got all this other stuff, bike lanes. And a bike lane for one mile is $1 million. And so when we see a bike lane coming through our community, that's $1 million, a block, not a mile. And so that kind of equity, blows your mind once you're aware of that kind of investment. And that's what I mean by underdevelopment. And so when we're designing, we do not do this kind of lowball. We just say what it's worth. And then if we can't find the money, we figure out ways to find the money. And for that park, that $1.5 million, we got the National Park Service to give us $300,000 for a bathroom. We got Clorox to help us with the playground. So we pieced together all of these pieces, and we did it. And we said, screw you, city. Right? And then they screwed us. They haven't taken care of it. So for 20 years, they haven't done anything. And they expect it to be. Right, and this is the madness, right? Where you see them taking care of the front of City Hall. Who gives a shit about the front of City Hall? That place is spotless. It's got 88 lights, right? That kind of, it's got stone paving, and no one's there other than protesters. But 2 blocks away, nothing. So it's like being really, I guess, on top of that in everything, and that's why our portfolio is diverse. We work for major museums, but we also work for the poorest communities. And I think you have to somehow be willing to cast this large net, because that to me is where that's equity, right? And I think for us Black architects or artists, when we focus only on the singular, they lock us out. They say, oh, you can only do that. Or you can only do this. We're in Wyoming and we're designing the sculpture trail in Wyoming, right? And this woman comes, she's like, why'd you choose it? And I overheard her, why'd you choose a Black guy to design this trail? And the director said, because he's good. but someone literally, they asked that question.
They're always looking for something. Who's your boss?
Yeah, are we gonna get a Black trail? Are this going to be an Afrocentric trail? Is he going to bring that stuff here? But really, people think it's like, I'm not going to mention them, but we were like shortlisted for a project, and someone was like, well, this is not a commemorative. We're not doing anything commemorative here. I was like, I know, I read the brief.
Wow.
But this notion that, you got to come here and bring all those ghosts and fuck with us, right?
Make us think about the things we don't want to.
No, we're going to give you a nice space. With a little something there, though.
Right.
There's always something. There's always something. There's always something you leave and they go like, there's always something there, right? If you look hard enough, I'm there. There's always something there, but it doesn't have to be screaming. It doesn't have to be the thing that's there.
Well, but equity is for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter your ethnicity.
Right.
And it doesn't matter the ethnicity of the person creating it, if they're creating it for equity, right?
Yeah, and we design for humans. This is the thing.
That's what I tell my students.
That architecture, if there were no people here, Bambi doesn't need me.
Yeah.
The squirrels don't need me. The oak tree doesn't need me. Right? It's when someone comes in and digs a hole and puts concrete in and then puts a box. That's why they need me, because now the oak tree's roots can't go here or the water can't, this is why we're here, is because of how we've kind of messed things up. So we're in the fix-it business in a certain way, right? We're trying to ameliorate all of the destruction, right, that humans do on this planet. And we try to ameliorate it and also think of sustainability, beauty, healing, and all those things. But we are very, very, how can I say, human? We're destructive people.
Oh, yeah.
We're very destructive.
Oh, yeah.
We bring water to places that don't want water. That's pretty amazing when you kind of think about it. It's like, this landscape doesn't want water, but we bring it anyway, and we force it to drink.
Yeah.
Right? This is California.
Yeah,
we force it to drink. And it's like, and it doesn't want to drink that much water. And it's telling us when it says, I've had enough. And that's when the cars start going down the street. Right? Because it can't hold anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just this weird thing that people can't see that. That the ground, after a while, the ground is like, I can't take anymore. right? And it just goes somewhere else, but we don't think about it that way. It's like, oh, we need more infrastructure. We need to do this. We need to do this. Like, no.
Just leave it alone.
Or we need to give it a bigger stomach. We need to allow more to go in different places. So.
I just want to jump back to something you said. I swear I'm going to get to the stuff.
That's okay.
Okay. But you said something that just resonated with me, and it was about equity and building equity. And here in the South, there is pervasive, I was a healthcare designer, so just stay with me for this. Okay. There is pervasive heart disease among Black communities. One of my grad students actually mapped it. You can see how communities that had large enslaved populations still have pervasive rates of heart disease, where in the Black communities, where even their white counterparts, their rates of heart disease, diabetes are improving. And then you can almost overlay things like sidewalks, which Auburn does not have enough sidewalks. Okay, I'm going to say that again because I see some class. Auburn does not have enough sidewalks. Thank you. But let alone bike lanes. We don't have any bike lanes except for on the university campus. So you're talking about equity. Even in our community here, our focus is so much on student health that we've kind of erased the health of the people supporting the students, so professors, their families, and things like that. But then the other more important people that are supporting the students, like the people cleaning the buildings and keeping them going, those that may not have transportation, that may have to walk to get to their jobs, which my family was a lot of those. And then never mind Opelika, which is and so I'm really curious about how do you come to a community leaders and say, as a landscape architect, you know what you really need to build is a sidewalk and a bike lane.
Well, I'll go to Opelika. Right, Opelika, if you guys don't know, it's a little town north of Miami.
Well, we have an Opelika here as well, too.
Oh, you're talking about that one?
I'm talking about this Opelika.
I'm going to Opelika.
Opelikas look kind
I'm going
of
to the other Opelika then. I was like, you were saying it, I was like, Opelika, so I was talking.
All Opelikas kind of look the same.
But it's in Florida. This one's in Florida, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very poor community. Corrupt politicians. It's where the Cubans landed with the cocaine. I mean, it has this crazy history. But it started this project of social practice, inviting artists there to help them think about their future. And I've never seen a place like this. I mean, it's just, if you could imagine marginality, right? It's like at its best, and it's in Florida, right? And so I asked the director if I could redesign the street because the community lived a mile from the town center where the art center was. And he says, yeah, that'd be great, Walter. And I said, I'm going to walk it. He goes, no, we'll drive. I'm going to walk. I'm going to walk the 1 mile down. 2 blocks in, I'm sweating because it's so hot. There are no trees. The sidewalks were 30 inches wide. And in the middle of the sidewalks were fire hydrants. So someone had come and I don't know if the hydrants came first or the sidewalks came first, but they actually didn't care. And you can just kind of see this for a mile. So I'm walking and cars would blow their horns. Are you okay? People.
That happens here.
Because it's like, you're an idiot. Why are you walking? It's hot. So I walked all the way there, and we came up with this project called Sights and Sights, and where we basically painted a 1 mile stretch of the street, all the inequities. But they didn't know that. They thought they were doing a painting project, right? So we literally painted a big red circle around the fire hydrant on the sidewalks, and the neighbors were doing this. And so it was twofold. One, it was showing them that you could do something if you had an idea. We got about 100 people out, Coast Guard, schools, and in one morning, we were able to paint a mile. So on one, we were showing them that you can do stuff here, but on the others, we were showing how screwed up things were, right? And the arts director was like, this is great. I'm gonna bring the engineers in, Walter, you're gonna work with them and all of this stuff. And the engineers came in and they looked at me as if I was an alien. And they started talking about how much water they have to move. I'm like, I know. And this design will hold the water. It was like, oh, this is too hard. And so they never did anything, right? But this is the thing. And they just still left people with this bare 1 mile landscape that they have to walk in. And these are brown and black people, right? Where you go a mile south, trees, sidewalks, golf course, right? And so you can imagine what people might feel in seeing that inequity and seeing the development that's happening. But we try to use art as a way to illuminate where you are. And sometimes that can empower people to do something. And sometimes it doesn't. But that's all we can attempt to do, is to get them to see how messed up it is. We just bought a new space for our office, a block away from our old space, which is probably in one of the worst corridors in Oakland on San Pablo. When I bought the space that I'm in, previous space, I wrote urban diaries. I wrote these notes all about the prostitutes and drug dealers. They're still there 25 years later, but the cost has gone up. And you go like, how is that even possible? Right? I mean, it's just like, how is it possible that the value of this landscape, you've left it undeveloped, but it has increased in value, right?
Makes you think about why.
Yeah.
You think about what's happened. I know Oakland's been gentrifying for a while. Ironically, lots of my family are talking about moving back to the South, following me, because the cost of California, it's too high, but the people are still there.
Yeah, because California, and this is what we don't understand in our communities, it's like we've been told that we have to sell because we're not going to be able to afford it in the future, which is a lie, right? Again, I bought one property, and the thing that they don't tell you, if you have property, you can get more property.
Well, but they're taking our ancestral property. A lot of heirs' property has been taken.
Because if someone is up in Chicago and your brother's up there and he doesn't want to, they can basically sell the land. And that's a big thing here. But, we've moved into the space to show people that you can be here. And I want other Black entrepreneurs or whatever to see that we're still here and that this is still a viable place for us. But somehow we've been told that it's not. And so probably in 20 years, we're not going to be there. The California Hotel, nonprofit, great history, performance space, Aretha Franklin, all the jazz greats came through. It's the most marginal thing ever. They can't have a vision for that, right? Let's just put the worst stuff in this thing. And so what does that say about our culture? That no one can kind of dream for our future in that way. And so we have to do it, because if we don't do it, we're not going to be there.
Yeah. But I think there's that narrative that the only way we can dream, the only way we can affect our community, the only way we can pull them out of all of this, disparity that's been passed down over and over, all of this, cultural trauma that we're living in, is to be doctors or lawyers or nurses, but not builders of spaces, even though we come from Masons that built DC and actually made these great communities and spaces that are being torn down. So.
No, they just want us to be labor and not even that.
Yes.
And so, I think we have to be present for our future. We have to be the ones who are looking and saying, this is the future that I want. And that's hard to do with a past like ours. And so a lot of our work, we do these futures cones and we try to go back and start over, right? Like I taught a course a few years ago. It's like, let's go back to 1989. And if we knew what we know now, and we made different decisions in '89, our world would be different. And so my students, one of them was like, well, in 1989, we gave, I'm just making this number up, maybe $100 million to our sports teams, right? The Raiders and the A's, to basically do this thing. They're gone. So he took the $100 million and he said, instead of giving it to the sports team, I'm going to give it to schools in West Oakland. And I'm going to teach them coding. Because African-American kids are the #1 gamers. Right?
I have 2 of those.
Right, and so they're the end users. And so he had figured out through this tabulation, if we had done that, everybody would be coming to West Oakland to get our coders. Another one, took the idea of language. There was the language movement in the 90s. And he was like, okay, we double down on the language. What would we become today? And so this notion of being able to look back and see where those opportunities were, and looking forward to make sure we don't make those same mistakes again, and we co-opted, and we're doing the same things. The new mayor's talking to the baseball team, trying to get them to say, let them go. You have worse problems. People are living on the streets, home, all of these things.
So
Friends, I'm going to have to jump in because we just
I
have
told you Chris was going to have to cut me off.
I know, as predicted. But we have time for a couple questions.
So I'm looking at your beautiful artwork, and it makes me think about something I read recently by Patricia Hill Collins, where she talks about Black quilters and how they don't shy away from color. And they don't necessarily see competition with color. Can you speak more about your relationship with color in your artwork?
You
can't hear me?
I can barely hear you, yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I was recently reading about Black quilters, or Patricia Hill Collins, and how she remarked that Black quilters don't shy away from color in their artwork. And how there's really not much competition with color. And it made me think about your artwork when I was looking at it. Can you talk more about your relationship with color?
Because she said, I didn't talk about your art at all.
I know.
That's what she said.
No, color's always fascinated me, right? To be seen, right? And primary colors in particular. Always in my life, there have always been adults or people that have been in my community and they want to be seen. There's a man walks down San Pablo in a blue suit, blue hat, blue cane, blue shoes, wants to be seen, right? I go to church, one woman in red, right? This notion of coming out, right? And there's something about color for me is I don't want to dull it, right? I want it to be there. And so even in some of my early landscapes works, the representations, I only use primary color. I never use green, and people would freak out. It's like, you're making a landscape, there's no green on the page. I'm like, there will be green, don't worry about it. But this notion, right, but to try to get at this feeling, right? To me, color has feeling and emotion. And so that's something that I'm constantly, flickering with in the studio, making landscapes. So it's in all of those things, but there's something nice about it. And one of my art teachers was like, you can't get it wrong, right? You can't get it wrong. And I was just in Venice and we were in this place having dinner and I'm looking at this fresco, just primary colors, right? There's not this need for any other colors. And so.
Can I piggyback off that question? Because I really did have questions about your stuff.
Yeah.
There's a couple of your images in this exhibit that you have pieces and parts of the human figures transparent. So I'm thinking about Save, the man in the front, and the wake with the kid on the floor. So how do you balance those? Because they're vibrantly colorful, but then there are parts of these people that are just transparent enough.
Well, first of all, this is the first time I've ever had a painting show in my life. And so this is the scariest moment. So Chris and all of you guys, thank you for allowing this to happen. I mean,
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
dibble and dabble, but this was the first time I literally rationally said, I want to make some paintings. Because there were these little sketches, but it was part of a thing of memory. I was trying to recall these 10 scenes from my early childhood. And there was a moment I was telling Sarita, it's like, I'm going to do this underpainting because at a certain point, I'm just going to stop. They're not finished in a certain way. And I wanted that feeling to be there, right? That some things are still, I can't quite remember. They're in focus, not in focus. And so that was one of the kind of ways in which I was trying to kind of bring back these images. And some of them, they're just fragments to a certain degree, right? And some of them are very, very clear. Like my grandfather in the casket is very clear to me, right? But all the kids in the room was just unclear because I have so many cousins and, just all over the place. And so just that notion where the food, the cakes are just very clear versus, the landscape out of the thing is kind of unclear. And so it was just going back and forth with those things, trying to remember. And I have to say it was a very cathartic process because it's like a year, right? And I only had time during the Christmas holiday because Sarita is my side person. We do all the work together, but she's like, the paintings have to go. It's like, I have to teach. I have to do the studio. I have to go to Chicago. All this. It's like, when do you find time to make the work? And to be in the studio for like 8 days, it was just this amazing gift, right? It's like we were talking earlier about listening. Like the world is so chaotic, and there's something about getting to the studio, not my studio with the 18 people, right? But the studio with me, right? And it was just something about it that this was just a gift to be able to do that. And now I want to do it more, right?
So we opened something here.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to that busy. I want to go back into that head space and see what's there, because again, it's like finding that stuff that these other things kind of push to the side. I won't say what they are.
Unfortunately, I think we have to leave it there. Unless, Sarita, do you have a question for Walter? Because I will give you a question. Okay.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
Well, the pressure's on, but I just wanted to hear Walter talk a little bit about some of the inversions that are present, I think, in all of your work, but within this exhibition as well, the dichotomy between the arc of your early life, which is shown in the paintings, and then the physical arc that becomes inverted as sculpture in the show.
Yeah, the show is called Arc of Life, Arc of Bones, and that's a Henry Dumas short story on Arc of Bones. And when Toni Morrison republished the work, I was just blown away, right, by these short stories. And a lot of them dealt with landscape, rain god, I mean, they all dealt with being in this kind of southern landscape, but Arc of Bones kind of stayed with me. This mythical ship going up and down the river collecting the bones of our ancestors. And I think there's one quote, it's like, these two kids, this is the house of our ancestors. And I was like, that's interesting. So in the beginning, we were going to build a boat, take it to the Alabama River, launch it,
Wow.
right? Have a big parade bringing it back, and then turn it upside down, and it becomes the house of our ancestors. And on the way there, the irony here is close to the space we were going to launch it, all hell broke loose, right? And it's like, that ain't happening. That is not happening, right? But other things were there. It's kind of interesting that happened. So that comes out of that. But I wanted to kind of talk about this notion of the kind of pain, the kind of and joy that exists in Black life, that I can remember, and I can talk about lynching, and I can talk about segregation. But again, as I was a kid, I was happy. And there's this thing where my parents probably shielded certain things away from me to allow normality to happen until I got to the point where I could actually see it, or that it somehow seeped in at times, being called certain things, But for the most time, I was happy, and then there were these moments of sadness, like Lorraine. You know, when King died, I remember, for some reason, Lorraine has stayed with me more than anything, right? Just that name.
Yeah.
Right.
I had a question about.
Right, it's just these things that just stay in your mind. It's like, but Lorraine has haunted me for so long. And then when they were doing the rehab, they allowed people to actually stand on the balcony.
Wow.
And it was the most powerful feeling I've ever had in a space. Because they don't allow you up there, but they allowed you there because the museum was closed and Mahalia was playing. And you could actually see the window where the gun came from. And me and my colleague, we just started crying because you're in that spot. And it reinforced this thing with me with history, right? Somehow in America, we kind of keep history over there, right? Or we don't let you touch it, right? Or feel it. And when you do, it's really powerful, like Gadsden's Wharf now. You go there and to see people walk up to that fountain and go, right? Because they know what happened there. And most of these places where things have happened, they're just buried. And we're standing on them. We just don't know.
Like bones of our ancestors. Like Joy said.
I'm sorry to have to cut the conversation short, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who participated today. Let's all get up because Lonnie Holly's ready to perform in the galleries, which if you haven't seen Lonnie, it's a treat. So I'll meet you in there in a second.